The Taliban commander grabbed the little girl by the throat, pressed the barrel of his pistol against her temple, and smiled. Not the smile of desperation. The smile of a man who believed he had already won. Behind him, 12 of his fighters were repositioning, not retreating. Repositioning, because this was never a rescue mission. It was always a funeral, and the Americans walking straight into it had no idea. Before we go any further, if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button and follow this story all the way to the end. Drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story has traveled. The cold came first. It always did in the Kunar province in January. Not the kind of cold that bites at your fingers or stiffens your joints. The kind that gets inside your chest and stays there quiet and patient, like it's waiting for something to go wrong. Master Chief Darnell Hawk Hawkins had been in enough bad places to know the difference between cold weather and a cold feeling. Tonight he had both. He adjusted the strap on his rifle and kept his eyes moving across the ridgeline above the convoy. 3 armored vehicles, 11 SEALs, 1 CIA handler named Greenberg, who hadn't stopped sweating since Bagram, despite the temperature being 17 degrees below zero, and 1 girl. She was sitting in the back of the second vehicle, pressed against the cold metal wall. Her knees pulled up slightly, her eyes closed, not sleeping. Hawk had been watching people sleep in combat vehicles for 16 years. You could always tell. Your body went slack when you slept. Your shoulders dropped. Your breathing changed. This girl wasn't sleeping. She was thinking hard. "She's still doing that thing," said Petty Officer Marcus Webb from the seat across from her. He was whispering, but not quietly enough. Just sitting there with her eyes closed like she's meditating or something. "Leave her alone, Webb," Hawk said. "I'm just saying, Hawk. She hasn't moved in 20 minutes. It's weird. You haven't done anything useful in 20 minutes. I don't find that weird. I find it consistent." Webb made a face but went quiet. The girl's name was Emily Carter. That was all Greenberg had told them at the briefing in Bagram 8 hours ago. Emily Carter, 15 years old. CIA Support Asset Category Sierra. When Commander Ryan Mitchell had introduced her to the team, the room had gone through 3 distinct phases in about 4 seconds. First, confusion. Second, the assumption that someone was joking. Third, laughter. It wasn't cruel laughter, exactly. It was the laughter of men who had spent their careers in the worst corners of the world and had developed a very specific sense of what belonged there and what didn't. A teenager in an oversized plate carrier with a rifle case that was almost as tall as she did not belong there. So they laughed. Emily had not reacted. Not a twitch, not a blink. She had stood at the edge of the briefing room with her hands folded in front of her, her dark eyes moving slowly across each face in the room, cataloging something. Hawk hadn't been able to figure out what at the time. He was starting to get an idea now. Commander Mitchell had taken the laughter seriously enough to address it. He was a careful man, Ryan Mitchell. Tall, deliberate, with the kind of quiet authority that didn't need to raise its voice. He had let the laughter run its course, and then he had said simply, "Asset Sierra 7 is your overwatch. You will treat her positioning as mission critical. Any questions about her capability can wait until after we extract Dr. Hassan." Dismissed. That had not gone over well. "Overwatch," Senior Chief Leo Garza had said afterward in the hallway, voice pitched low but carrying. "They gave us a child for Overwatch, in a blizzard, on a night extraction." "She's not a child," Greenberg had said, appearing from around a corner with the slightly harassed look of a man who had given this explanation before and found it insufficient every time. "She's the most accurate shooter the CIA has evaluated in the last decade. Her range scores—" "I don't care about range scores," Garza said. "I care about what happens when someone's shooting back." Greenberg had looked at him for a moment. "So does she," he said and walked away. Now they were 40 minutes out from the target compound, moving through a mountain pass that the intelligence maps described as lightly trafficked. The blizzard had kicked up 2 hours ago ahead of schedule, reducing visibility to somewhere between bad and catastrophic. The thermal imaging was compromised. The drones that were supposed to be feeding them real-time surveillance had been pulled back to avoid the storm. They were in the language of the mission briefing, operating with reduced situational awareness. In the language of men who had actually been shot at, they were flying blind. Emily opened her eyes. She turned her head toward the small reinforced window on the side of the vehicle and stared at nothing visible for a long moment. Then she reached up and tapped twice on the partition between the passenger compartment and the driver's cab. The vehicle slowed. "What are you doing?" Webb asked. She didn't answer him. She picked up the handset on the vehicle's internal comm system. "This is Sierra 7. I need the convoy to halt for 2 minutes." There was a pause. Then Commander Mitchell's voice came back. "Sierra 7, we're on schedule. What's your reason?" The heat signature pattern on the North Ridge changed between our last imagery and right now. "The spacing is wrong." Another pause, longer this time. "What do you mean wrong?" "In the last satellite pass, the heat clusters on that ridge were consistent with 2 to 3 individuals spaced irregularly. Right now, I'm counting a different pattern through the thermals. Tighter spacing, more disciplined. That's not Shepard's in the cold, Commander." The vehicle had stopped moving. Through the partition, Hawk could hear the driver waiting. Garza's voice cut into the comm. "How is she reading thermals?" "The thermals are compromised. Even our equipment is showing garbage data tonight." "My equipment is calibrated differently," Emily said. There was nothing defensive in her voice, just factual. "I've been adjusting for the atmospheric scatter from the storm for the last 30 minutes. The pattern is there if you know how to filter it." "She's 15, Garza said, not to Mitchell, not to Emily, just to the air, as if reminding the universe of something it had apparently forgotten. "Senior Chief," Mitchell said evenly, "I wasn't asking for a biography." Emily's voice came back unchanged. "I'm not telling you to abort. I'm telling you the North Ridge needs to be watched before we enter the approach corridor. If I'm wrong, we lose 4 minutes. If I'm right." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Mitchell was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Hawk had worked with the man for 6 years. 3 seconds of silence from Ryan Mitchell meant he was running the calculation, running the risk, weighing the source of the information against the cost of being wrong in either direction. 2 minutes, Mitchell said. "Sierra 7, take your position." Emily was already moving. She unclipped her harness with the kind of economy of motion that Hawk associated with people who had practiced it 10,000 times. She pulled the rifle case toward her, unzipped it in the dark without looking at her hands, and began assembling the weapon with a focused quietness that made the compartment feel very still. Webb was staring at her. "Stop staring," Hawk told him. I'm just watching." "Same thing, stop." Emily said nothing. She finished the assembly, checked the chamber, and then looked at Hawk directly for the first time since they'd boarded. Her eyes were dark and completely steady. "Is there a good position on the eastern face of the vehicle?" Hawk blinked. "Yeah, there's a running board about 18 inches wide." "That's enough." She moved toward the door. "It's below zero out there," Webb said. "Aguantazo." "I know," she said, and she stepped out into the storm. Hawk watched her through the window. She moved to the eastern side of the vehicle, stepped up onto the running board, and settled herself against the armored plating with the practiced ease of someone who had done it in worse conditions. She brought the rifle up. She went still, and she began to watch the ridge. "She's really out there," Webb said quietly. "Yes," Hawk said. "In a blizzard." "Yes. She weighs like 100 pounds. "Webb, I need you to stop narrating what we can both already see." The 2 minutes passed. The comm stayed silent. Then Emily's voice came back, calm and precise as a metronome. "North Ridge position bearing 042, approximately 600 meters. I've got at least 5 individuals. They're not moving, which means they're waiting. They knew we were coming through this corridor." The silence on the comm was of a different quality now. It was the silence of 11 experienced men absorbing information that rearranged the shape of the night. "You're confident?" Mitchell asked. "I'm confident," Emily said. "Commander, this approach is compromised. They have eyes on the corridor. If we continue on this route, we will be in the open for approximately 900 meters with no cover. They can engage us before we close to within effective return range." Garza's voice again, quieter now. The amusement had bled out of it. "How do you know they haven't already called it in? How do you know there aren't more of them at the compound?" "I don't," Emily said. "That's what I'm trying to find out." Another silence. Then Mitchell said, "Options." And Emily, 15 years old, 110 pounds, standing on an 18-inch running board in a mountain blizzard, began to lay out a tactical rerouting plan with the clarity and efficiency of someone who had been briefed on the terrain for months. Because she had been. Hawk found that out later. 3 months of satellite imagery, topographical studies, climate pattern analysis, and historical movement data for this specific mountain corridor. She had memorized it, not studied it. Memorized it because her father had taught her that you could not trust your equipment in the field. You could only trust what you already knew. Hawk didn't know about her father yet. That came later too. What he knew right now in this moment was that the girl on the running board outside his vehicle was giving a tactical briefing that was better than anything he'd heard in a morning debrief at a forward operating base. And the men on his team who had laughed 6 hours ago were not laughing now. They were listening. "We reroute through the secondary drainage channel on the western slope," Emily said. "It adds 14 minutes to our approach, but it keeps us below the ridge line and out of their sight lines. We regain the primary route at grid point Kilo 7 after the corridor opens up and their angle of attack is no longer viable." "And the welcoming party on the ridge?" Garza asked. "They'll wait," Emily said. "So, ambush positions have a patience window. Once they figure out we've rerouted, they'll move. But that movement is visible and it takes time. We'll be at the compound before they can reposition. And if they have a radio?" "They do," she said, "which is why we need to move in the next 3 minutes. I can delay their communication." "How?" Mitchell asked. Emily said, "I can take the antenna off the transmitter at their position. I've got a clear line if I move 20 meters north." Dead silence. She was talking about a 600-meter shot, in a blizzard, in the dark, at a piece of equipment roughly the size of a man's forearm. Webb made a sound that was not quite a word. "That's," Garza started, stopped, started again. "That's not a shot." "It's a difficult shot," Emily said. "It's not impossible." "Sierra 7, Mitchell began. "Commander, give me the 3 minutes. If I miss, we lose nothing we weren't already losing. If I connect, they can't call the compound before we change routes." Another 3-second silence from Mitchell. "Take your shot," he said. She took 20 steps north through the snow without being told. She found a position behind a rock outcropping, settled in so fast it was almost unsettling to watch, and went completely still. The storm howled around her. Her coat, which was too big for her frame, caught the wind and snapped twice, and then she adjusted her position and the coat settled too. Hawk was watching through the vehicle's thermal display. Even with the degraded imaging, he could track her heat signature. She was motionless, entirely motionless. Not the motionlessness of someone trying to stay still, the motionlessness of someone who had simply decided that movement was not useful right now. He counted. 40 seconds, 50, 1 minute. Webb had stopped talking entirely. Garza on the comm said nothing. At 68 seconds, Emily fired. One shot. The suppressor turned the sound into something small and flat and almost polite. Through the thermal, Hawk watched a heat bloom spike and vanish on the ridge. Then he watched a small object, the antenna array, separate from the main cluster of heat signatures. The radio was gone. No one said anything for a full 4 seconds. Then Webb said in a voice that had lost most of its color, "Did she just?" "Yes," Hawk said. "From there in this, yes, she's 15. "Webb." Hawk turned to look at him. "I know how old she is. Stop reminding me. It's not helping." On the comm, Mitchell's voice came back. It was the same voice he always used. Measured, professional, giving nothing away. But Hawk had worked with the man for 6 years. He knew all the registers. And this particular register, this very, very careful evenness, was what Ryan Mitchell's voice did when he was surprised. "Good shot, Sierra 7. Reroute to secondary. We move in 90 seconds. Emily climbed back down from her position, walked back to the vehicle, and stepped up onto the running board without saying anything. She brought the rifle back to her shoulder and resumed watching the ridge, as if she had done nothing more remarkable than check the weather. Garza came through on the private channel Hawk shared with the senior leadership element. His voice was low, not quite chastened, but altered. "Hawk, you got eyes on her right now." "Yeah," Hawk said. "What's she doing?" "Watching the ridge." A pause. "Okay," Garza said, and clicked off. They rerouted 14 minutes through a drainage channel that was too narrow, too icy, and too steep to be comfortable at any point. Nobody complained. The team moved with the specific focus of people who had just recalibrated their understanding of their situation and were now dealing with the version that was real instead of the version they'd planned for. Because what Emily had seen on that ridge changed everything. This was not a standard extraction. Somewhere between the last satellite pass and tonight, the enemy knew they were coming. Dr. Hassan, the American-educated Afghan physician who had been taken 6 weeks ago and whose rescue had taken 3 months of planning and 2 failed attempts to arrange, was somewhere inside that compound. And the people holding him were no longer simply holding him, they were waiting to use him. The full shape of that realization landed on Hawk somewhere around the 7th minute of the reroute, when they were deep in the drainage channel and the ridge was above them and behind them. And he thought about how many RPG teams you could move into position in 14 minutes. If you had 14 minutes of warning and knew exactly which corridor your target was avoiding. He keyed his private comm. Sierra 7. Emily's voice came back immediately. Senior Chief? When we get to Kilo 7 and we're back on the primary route, what's your read? A pause, not a long one. They'll have adjusted. I expect they'll try to funnel us. Create a kill zone between the compound entrance and the main building. How many? The initial Ridge team was 5. The compound usually runs 8 to 12 for a holding operation. Add the Ridge team after repositioning. Another pause. I'd plan for 15 to 20. Hawk absorbed that, with Dr. Hassan inside. Yes, and they know we're coming for him. They've known since before we left Bagram, she said. There was something in her voice when she said it. Not bitterness, something more careful than bitterness. Someone talked. That hit the channel like a stone hitting still water. Hawk kept his voice steady. You knew that before we left. I suspected it, Emily said. I didn't have confirmation until the ridge. The positioning was too specific. They weren't patrolling, they were placed. Why didn't you? Hawk stopped himself. I told Greenberg at the briefing, she said quietly. He said the intelligence was sound. Another silence. Okay, Hawk said, because there was nothing else to say right now. There would be time later for the conversation about what had been reported to whom and why it hadn't changed anything. Right now, there was the drainage channel and the ice and the 14 minutes in the compound waiting at the end of it. Sierra 7, he said, still here. When we hit Kilo 7, I want you to tell me what you see before we move. Not Greenberg, not comms, me directly. A pause, then understood, Senior Chief. He clicked off. Looked at Webb, who had been watching him with that expression that younger operators got when they realized the situation was significantly more complicated than the briefing had suggested. The expression that meant they were recalibrating too. It's going to be okay, Hawk told him. It was not strictly speaking a promise he could keep, but it was the right thing to say. They hit Kilo 7 at 11:43. Emily's voice on the comm as they cleared the drainage channel and came back up onto the approach route was as level as it had been 6 hours ago in Bagram, as if the blizzard and the compromised intelligence and the 600-meter antenna shot in the dark were simply details she had already accounted for and filed away. I see the compound, she said. Main gate is lit, 2 visible guards, but the positioning suggests there are more inside the gate structure. Eastern wall has movement, at least 3 individuals, possibly 4 moving in a pattern consistent with staged positioning. Staged how? Mitchell asked. Like they're setting up fields of fire, Emily said. Not patrolling, not guarding, setting up fields of fire from the eastern approach. Which is our primary breach point, Garza said very flatly. Yes, Emily said. So they know that too. They know the standard approach for a compound of this configuration, Emily said. The eastern wall is the tactically obvious breach point. Any competent defender would cover it. Or any defender who was told exactly what we were planning, Garza said. Nobody said anything to that. I need another 2 minutes, Emily said. I want to watch the pattern on the eastern wall before I give you a breach recommendation. You're giving breach recommendations now, Garza said. And there it was again, that slight edge that had been in his voice at Bagram. Smaller now, but still there. Emily did not respond to the tone. She simply said, I'm giving you what I see, Senior Chief Garza. What you do with it is your call. Garza was quiet. Hawk watched the compound from his position at the lead vehicle and thought about the shape of what was happening. 11 men and 1 girl in a blizzard outside a compound that had been turned into a trap. An informant somewhere in the chain behind them, a hostage inside, and a 15-year-old who 8 minutes ago had shot the antenna off a radio from 600 meters in the dark. He thought about Garza's voice at Bagram, the laughter in the briefing room, the way Greenberg had said, "She's not a child," and none of them had really heard it. He thought about the way Emily had stood at the edge of that room and watched each of them cataloging something. He understood now what she had been cataloging. She had been counting who would listen and who wouldn't. And she had not been angry about the answer. She had simply filed it away, accounted for it. The way you accounted for wind speed and bullet drop and atmospheric scatter, variables that weren't personal, just real. Senior Chief Hawkins, her voice came directly through his personal comm, not the group channel. "Go ahead," he said. "The eastern wall pattern just changed. They've stopped moving." "Stopped how?" "Final positions," she said. "They're set. They're waiting for us to breach." Hawk looked at the compound, looked at the blizzard, looked at the 11 men around him who were the best at what they did, and who were nonetheless walking towards something that had been specifically designed to kill them. "Sierra 7, he said. "I'm listening. What do we do?" And the girl who wasn't supposed to be there, who was too young and too small, and had been laughed at 6 hours ago in a warm briefing room at Bagram, began to tell him 11:47 p.m. Emily's voice came through Hawk's personal comm with the kind of precision that made you lean forward without realizing you were doing it. "Don't breach the eastern wall. That's what they want. The moment you blow that entry point, you will have crossfire from the gate structure on your left and the building roofline on your right. You'll lose people in the first 15 seconds. Hawk didn't answer immediately. He was already running it in his head, matching her read against what he could see against 16 years of compounds and corridors and entry points that looked like exits and exits that were actually graves. She was right. The geometry was wrong. The eastern wall was too clean, too obvious, too perfectly positioned for exactly the kind of approach the mission plan called for. "Then what?" he said. "The northern face. There's a section of wall approximately 30 meters west of the main northern gate. The mortar pattern on the satellite imagery from 3 months ago shows degraded structural integrity. One charge will open it. They won't have that angle covered because it's not a standard breach point. It puts you inside the compound's dead zone, the area their staged positions can't reach without repositioning." Garza cut into the comm. Not the private channel, the group one. "How long does repositioning take?" 40 to 60 seconds if they're disciplined, Emily said. 90 to 2 minutes if they're not. "And we don't know which they are." "We're about to find out," she said. Mitchell came on. "Sierra 7, if we go through the northern face, what's your overwatch position?" "I need the elevated point on the ridgeline at bearing 315, approximately 920 meters from the compound center. From there, I have sight lines on the gate structure, the eastern wall, the roof line, and the courtyard interior." 920 meters, Webb said from somewhere behind Hawk. Not skeptical, just repeating it, like he needed to hear the number out loud to believe it was a real number that a person was actually proposing. "In these conditions," Mitchell said carefully. "That's manageable," Emily said. A beat of silence. "Manageable," Garza repeated. "Yes." Hawk could hear something working its way through Garza's chest. Not quite a laugh, not quite a something in between that was the sound of a very experienced man revising a very confident assumption. "All right," Garza said finally. "All right, let's move." They split. Emily went north and up, moving through the storm with that same economy of motion Hawk had noticed earlier. No wasted steps, no hesitation. She knew exactly where she was going because she had already been there 100 times in her mind, walking the terrain from the satellite images, calculating angles and distances the way other people calculated grocery lists. Hawk watched her heat signature on the thermal until the storm swallowed it. And then he turned back to the compound, and the 11 men who were now shifting their entire approach based on what a 15-year-old had told them from a running board in a blizzard. 11:52 p.m. They stacked at the northern face in under 4 minutes. Reyes, the team's breacher, a compact man from San Antonio with forearms like bridge cables and a patience for explosives that bordered on spiritual, ran his hands along the wall section Emily had identified without being told twice. He tapped, listened with his fingertips. "She's right," he said, pulling back. "This wall's cooked. One linear charge middle section, it'll fold like paper." "How loud?" Mitchell asked. "Loud enough," Reyes said. "Can't help that." "Then we're committed the moment it blows," Mitchell said. "No hesitation, no regrouping. We go through and we don't stop moving until we have Dr. Hassan. Clear. 11 confirmed. Hawk was the 12th. Sierra 7. Mitchell said into the comm. We're 60 seconds from the breach. Confirm your position. Emily's voice came back, and there was something in it that Hawk had not heard before. Not nervousness. Something more like focus that had sharpened past a certain point and become very, very quiet. I'm set. I have visual on the gate structure. 2 visible, 4 more in cover positions behind the inner wall. I also have eyes on the roofline, 1 position eastern corner with an RPG. RPG, Hawk said. He's not moving yet. He doesn't know where you are. Yet, Garza said. 40 seconds, Mitchell said. Reyes set the charge. The 30 seconds that followed were the particular kind of silence that Hawk had never been able to explain to anyone who hadn't experienced it. It wasn't quiet. The blizzard was still there, the wind was still there, and somewhere inside the compound, a generator was running with a diesel rattle that carried through the cold air. But underneath all of that, there was a quality of stillness that settled over the team. The stillness of men who had made their decision and were now simply waiting for the world to catch up. Hawk thought about Emily on that ridge, 920 meters. The storm between her and the target. The variables she was holding in her head, simultaneously wind speed, atmospheric pressure, temperature drop, bullet trajectory, the movement patterns of 12 or more armed men, the location of one hostage, the geometry of an entire compound laid out in her memory like a blueprint she'd drawn herself. He thought about how still she had gone behind that rock before the antenna shot. He stopped thinking about it because Reyes said, ready? And Mitchell said, breach. And the world came apart. 11:54 p.m. The charge was exactly as loud as Reyes had promised, which was very loud. The section of northern wall didn't just open, it folded the way Reyes had said inward and down, and the team was moving before the dust cleared because that was the only way this worked. You moved before your brain had time to remind you what you were moving toward. Hawk went through third. The courtyard was dark and disoriented with the blast and the storm, and the first thing he registered was shouting Arabic and Pashto mixed together voices of men who had been waiting for a sound from a completely different direction and were now frantically trying to reorient. The second thing he registered was Emily's voice in his earpiece, absolutely calm. Roofline RPG is moving. He's tracking left away from your breach point. He hasn't found you yet. Gate positions are turning. You have approximately 20 seconds before they have angles. 20 seconds. Hawk moved. The courtyard crossing was 40 meters. He made it in 6 seconds. Torres and Webb flanked left. Garza and 2 others went right. Mitchell was calling positions on the command channel in that measured voice he never lost, and the compound erupted into the specific chaos of a night breach where one side had a plan and the other side had a trap that had just sprung in the wrong direction. The first exchange of fire lasted 11 seconds. Emily's voice in his ear concurrent with the shooting. 2 left side behind the water tank. Don't. The water tank position opened up. Webb returned fire. One of the 2 went down immediately. The other retreated deeper into the compound. Gate guard breaking right, Emily said. He's going for the main building. He's going to Hassan, Mitchell said. Yes, Emily said. You need someone on the main building entrance, now. Torres was already moving. Hawk didn't have to redirect him. Torres had heard it and made the same calculation in the same instant, which was what happened when you worked with good people long enough. Roofline, Emily said. Hawk dropped without thinking. The RPG round went over his head by a distance he would later estimate at approximately 8 feet, which was approximately 8 feet more than he was comfortable with. It hit the far wall and detonated, and the concussion knocked him sideways, and he came up firing in the direction the round had originated from and heard Emily say simultaneously, he's repositioning, east corner second ledge. He's going to try again. I can't see him, Hawk said. You don't need to, she said. Move 4 meters left and go flat. He moved 4 meters left and went flat. The shot came from 920 meters away and passed through approximately 30 meters of blizzard and arrived at the roof line with the same polite flatness as every other shot she had fired tonight. The RPG gunner on the second ledge stopped repositioning. He stopped everything. Hawk got up. Good shot, he said. Main building entrance, she said. Torres needs support. He was already running, midnight exactly. Torres had the entrance pinned, but not cleared. The guard who had broken for the building had friends inside, and they had the kind of fortified interior position that turned a doorway into a problem. Hawk came in from the left angle, Torres was right, and they worked it in the way that two people worked when they had done it enough times that it didn't require conversation. 30 seconds, then the entrance was clear. Inside, the building smelled of diesel and something chemical that Hawk didn't want to think about. Hassan is in the interior room rear of the buildings, Emily said. I can see a heat signature consistent with a restrained individual. How do you have thermals on the interior? Webb asked. The rear wall has degraded insulation. I can see through it partially. A pause. There are two individuals with him. Armed. They know you're inside. Two armed guards with the hostage in a confined space. Hawk ran the geometry of it and didn't like any of the answers. Sierra 7, can you? No, she said before he finished. I don't have an angle on the interior. The wall reading is partial. I can't shoot what I can't fully see. Understood. Hawk looked at Torres. Torres looked back at him. Then Torres looked down the corridor toward the rear room and back at Hawk again, with the expression of a man who was working through a very short list of options and finding all of them uncomfortable. We go in, Hawk said. Yeah, Torres said. They went in. What happened in the next 40 seconds was the kind of thing that took 40 seconds to live through and about 40 minutes to fully process afterward. Hawk took a round in the upper left arm through and through the plate carrier, caught most of it, but the edge of the impact left him with a numbness that ran from his shoulder to his wrist that he filed away for later. Torres took a hit on the vest center mass that sat him down for 3 seconds before he got back up. The two guards were disciplined, and they were fast, and they were fighting for their lives in a room with a hostage they could not afford to lose. They lost. It took 40 seconds. Hawk was kneeling next to Dr. Hassan, a thin man in his 50s with zip ties on his wrists and a cut above his left eye that had crusted over, but breathing, conscious, tracking, when Mitchell came through the main door with 2 others. We have him, Hawk said. Casualties, Mitchell asked. Torres has a bruise the size of a dinner plate on his sternum, and I need my left arm looked at. But we're standing. Mitchell looked at him for exactly 1 second. Then he said, good, and turned to Dr. Hassan and said in careful Dari, we're going to get you out. Can you walk? Hassan looked at him. His eyes were alert despite everything. Yes, he said. Yes, I can walk. Then we move in 30 seconds, 12:03 a.m. They were pulling back through the compound when Emily came back on the comm with a tone that made the back of Hawk's neck go cold. Not louder, not faster, just different. The way a pilot's voice changed right before they told you something was structurally wrong with the aircraft. I have movement on the western approach. Multiple vehicles. Coming fast. Reinforcements, Garza said. At least 3 vehicles. Could be more behind the storm. How far out? Mitchell asked. 6 minutes. Maybe 7. We need 8 to reach the extraction point, Hawk said. Nobody said anything to that for a moment. Then Emily said, I can slow them down. How? Mitchell asked. The lead vehicle. If I take out the engine block, they'll have to dismount and come on foot. That buys you 4 extra minutes. Mitchell stopped. That's a moving vehicle, a blizzard at over 900 meters. Yes, she said. Sierra 7. Commander, I have the shot or I don't. Give me the call. The 3 seconds of Mitchell's silence. Take it, he said, 12:04 a.m. Hawk was moving through the courtyard with Hassan's arm over his shoulder when he heard that same small, flat sound from 900 meters away. And then faintly through the storm, the sound of an engine dying. Then silence. Then much closer, the sound of vehicle doors and shouted commands in Pashto. They were on foot. You bought us the time, Mitchell said into the comm. 4 minutes, 20 seconds, Emily said. Move fast. They moved fast. Dr. Hassan, for a man who had been held captive for 6 weeks and had a cut on his head and zip ties recently removed from his wrist, moved with a determination that Hawk would remember for a long time. He didn't slow them down. He didn't complain. He put one foot in front of the other in the blizzard with the particular focus of a man who understood exactly what was behind him and had very strong feelings about not going back. 12:07 a.m. They were 200 meters from the extraction point when the second ambush opened up. Not from ahead, from the left. The ridge that the original team had been sitting on, the ridge Emily had identified before they even started moving, The one with 5 fighters who had been placed too precisely to be a coincidence had repositioned exactly as she had predicted. And while she had predicted it, and while the road had bought them time, the fighters had used that time. They hit the team from 60 meters, which in a blizzard was almost point blank. Webb went down immediately. Not a kill shot his leg, and he was cursing very loudly, which meant he was alive, and his airway was clear. And Hawk filed both of those things under good as he went to ground and started returning fire into the dark. The comm erupted. Mitchell was calling positions. Garza was directing the right side of the line. Torres, still moving despite the dinner plate bruise on his chest, was pulling Webb behind a rock formation. Dr. Hassan had gone flat on his own initiative, which meant whatever else 6 weeks in Taliban captivity had done to him, it hadn't taken his survival instincts. And through all of it, Emily's voice in Hawk's earpiece, steady as a compass. Left ridge, first position, approximately 62 meters. Second position, 8 meters right of the first. Third position, I'm still locating. Fourth and fifth are moving. Moving where, Hawk said, returning fire at a muzzle flash. Trying to flank right. They want to cut off the extraction route. Can you? The shot came before he finished the question. The first ridge position went silent. Then 4 seconds later, the second. Still finding 3, 4, and 5, she said. There was something in her voice that Hawk had not heard all night. Something very faint. Not panic, nothing like panic, but the edge of something. The edge of the place where calculation ended and the next thing began. Take your time, he said, which was a strange thing to say in an active firefight, but he meant it, and she seemed to understand it. I can see 3, she said. He's behind the rock formation at your 2 o'clock, approximately 70 meters. Garza opened up on the 2 o'clock position. Sustained. The rock formation stopped producing return fire. 4 and 5 are still moving, Emily said. They're close to the extraction route. Hawk, if they reach the waypoint before you. I know, he said. He made a decision. He turned to the man next to him, Petty Officer Cruz Young, capable, steady under fire, and said, On me, we're moving right. Cruz didn't hesitate. That was the thing about this team. Under pressure, they stopped hesitating. They broke right at a run through the blizzard using the noise and chaos of the main firefight as cover. And Emily was talking in his ear the whole way 20 meters. Keep going. Left. 10 degrees, they're just past the rock line. And at some point, Hawk stopped thinking and just followed her voice the way you followed a radio beacon in zero visibility. She was the instrument. He was the aircraft. And she didn't have him wrong, 12:09 a.m. The 2 fighters who had been trying to flank the extraction route did not reach the waypoint. Hawk and Cruz made sure of that. When it was over, Hawk was breathing hard, and his left arm had moved from numb to a specific burning that he associated with torn muscle tissue. And Cruz had a gash on his forehead from a rock fragment that was bleeding freely and enthusiastically, but not dangerously. We're clear, Hawk said into the comm. Copy, Barcelona, Mitchell said. All elements move to extraction. We have a window. Webb, Hawk said. I'm fine. Webb said immediately and aggressively, which meant he was not fine, but he was not dying, which was fine enough for right now. They moved 12:13 a.m. Emily's voice for the first time all night had something that might have been relief in it. Very small, very controlled, but there. Extraction point is clear. I have visual on the helicopter. It's coming in from the northeast. You can see the helicopter, Torres said. I can see its heat signature through the storm, yes. Of course you can, Torres said in a tone that had completely stopped trying to contain what it was feeling. Sierra 7, Mitchell said, we need you at the extraction point. Break your position and move. Already moving, she said. And then, with a timing that Hawk would later describe as either extraordinary or completely deliberate, probably both, she said, and Commander, the 5 fighters from the original Ridge team. I've confirmed all 5 are no longer a threat. A beat of silence on the comm. You took down all 5 from your Overwatch position, Mitchell asked. Between the initial engagement and the flanking attempt, yes. Garza said nothing. Hawk waited to hear what he would say, because Garza always had something to say, and the fact that he was saying nothing was itself something. Mitchell said, good work, Sierra 7. Thank you, Commander, Emily said. And that was all. The helicopter came in hard and fast through the storm, the pilots working against wind shears that were by any reasonable standard not compatible with this kind of operation. But they came in anyway because that was the deal, that was always the deal, and when the skids touched down, Hawk was already moving Hassan toward the door. He got Hassan inside, turned back to help Webb, who was being carried between Torres and Cruz and was still cursing, which was still good. Got Webb inside, turned again. Emily was the last one to the helicopter. She came out of the storm the way she had appeared throughout the night, quietly, precisely, without announcement. She had the rifle case on her back, and her face was unreadable under the cold and the wind. She was covered in snow. Her coat, still too large for her, was dark across the right shoulder, where she had been lying on the ground for the last 2 hours. She climbed into the helicopter. She sat down. She closed her eyes. Hawk watched her for a moment. Then he looked at Garza, who was across the compartment, and found that Garza was also watching her. Their eyes met. Garza looked away first, which from Leo Garza was its own kind of answer. The helicopter lifted. Dr. Hassan, sitting across from Emily, looked at her for a long time. He was a physician. He had spent a career reading people the way other people read books in the details and the things that were too controlled or not controlled enough. He looked at her the way you looked at something that didn't quite fit the category you had prepared for it. Then he said quietly in English, "How old are you?" Emily opened her eyes. She looked at him. 15, she said. Hassan absorbed that. "You came for me," he said. "Yes. All of you," he said, and looked around the compartment at the 11 men in various states of injury and exhaustion and adrenaline crash. "All of you came for me." "That's what we do," Hawk said. Hassan looked back at Emily. "She is the one who got you here," he said. It was not a question. Hawk looked at Emily. She was watching Hassan with those steady dark eyes that cataloged everything and gave back only what she chose to give back. She didn't confirm it. She didn't deny it. She just watched him, and after a moment she said, "We all got here together, Dr. Hassan." Hassan nodded slowly. He didn't push it. He was a man who had learned in the past 6 weeks to recognize which answers were the real ones and which ones were the polite versions. He knew which one that was. He leaned back against the wall of the helicopter and closed his eyes. And in the howling dark above the Hindu Kush, with the blizzard raging outside, and Webb's cursing finally tapering into the quieter sounds of a man in controlled pain, and Garza sitting with his arms on his knees and his head down thinking something that he hadn't said yet and might never say out loud, Hawk looked at the girl who had just dismantled an ambush, rerouted an insertion, disabled a communications relay, neutralized an RPG gunner, stopped a reinforcement convoy, held an overwatch position at 920 meters in a blizzard, and brought 11 men and 1 hostage out of a mountain compound that had been specifically designed to be a killing ground. And he thought about the laughter in the briefing room. 6 hours ago, it felt like something that had happened in a different life, 12:41 a.m. The helicopter touched down at Bagram with the kind of controlled violence that told you the pilots had been fighting the storm the entire way back and had simply refused to lose. The rotors were still spinning when the medical team hit the ramp, 3 people moving fast with a gurney for Webb, a second one for Hassan, and a third that Hawk waved off with his good arm because he was walking and planned to keep walking until someone made him stop. Emily stepped off last. Again. She stood on the tarmac in the rotor wash with the rifle case on her back and the snow still in her hair, and she looked like someone who had just returned from somewhere that most people in that base would never go, which was exactly what she was. Greenberg was waiting. He was standing at the edge of the landing zone with his hands in his jacket pockets and his face doing the thing it did when he was relieved and trying not to show it too much, because relief implied that he had been worried, and being worried implied that the plan had carried more risk than he had officially stated in the briefing room at Bagram 7 hours ago. Emily walked toward him. She didn't run. She didn't rush. She walked with the same deliberate steadiness she'd had all night, and when she reached him, she stopped. "Dr. Hassan is alive," she said. "I can see that," Greenberg said. "Webb took a round in the leg. He'll need surgery. Hawk has soft tissue damage in the left arm. Cruz has a laceration superficial." She paused. "Reyes twisted his ankle in the drainage channel. He didn't report it during the operation." Greenberg blinked. "How do you know that?" "His gait changed at 11:58 and didn't correct. He was compensating." She looked at him steadily. "You need to get him looked at before the adrenaline wears off and he realizes how bad it is." Greenberg stared at her for a moment. Then he turned and said something to the medical coordinator behind him. The coordinator moved immediately toward Riches, who was walking across the tarmac with the specific exaggerated normalcy of a man trying very hard to prove he was fine. "You told me the intelligence was sound," Emily said. Greenberg turned back to her. His expression changed. "Emily, someone in the chain told them we were coming. The ambush positions were placed, not reactive, placed before we arrived." She was not raising her voice. She never raised her voice. That was somehow worse. "I told you in the pre-brief that the timing window on the satellite imagery was inconsistent with normal pattern of life data for that compound. I told you the spacing on the heat signatures in the secondary confirmation pass looked staged. The analyst team reviewed. The analyst team was looking at the data they were given," Emily said. "I was looking at what was missing." Greenberg was quiet. "There's a leak," she said, "between here and wherever that intelligence originated. You need to find it before the next team goes out." She looked at him for one more beat. "We were lucky tonight. Luck is not a method." She walked past him toward the operations building. Greenberg watched her go. Then he turned and found Hawk standing 6 feet away, his left arm held slightly away from his body in the careful posture of someone managing pain without advertising it, watching the same direction Emily had walked. "How was she?" Greenberg asked. Hawk thought about the antenna shot, the reroute, the roofline RPG, the stopped convoy, the flanking fighters, the 5 positions on the ridge. He thought about her voice in his earpiece all night, steady as a fixed star, giving him angles and distances and enemy positions the way a doctor reads vitals. He thought about the very small change in her voice at 12:04 that had lasted approximately 8 seconds and then resolved back into that complete trained stillness. "She was the best operator on the mission," Hawk said. Greenberg nodded slowly, like he'd expected that answer and wasn't sure what to do with it. "She's 15, Hawk said. Not the way Webb had been saying it all night, not with disbelief or dismissal, just with the weight of what that actually meant, what it contained, what it was going to keep costing." "I know," Greenberg said. "Who trained her?" Greenberg looked at him. Something moved across his face that wasn't quite reluctance, more like the expression of someone deciding which version of the truth was the appropriate one for this conversation. "Her father," he said finally. "Who was her father?" "Someone who was very good at this," Greenberg said, "and who isn't here anymore." He walked away before Hawk could ask the next question, 1:15 a.m. The debrief room at Bagram smelled like coffee that had been sitting too long and the particular institutional staleness of the space where serious things were discussed under fluorescent lights at weird hours of the night, when serious things shouldn't have to be discussed. The team sat around a rectangular table in various states of post-mission, unwinding, some leaning back, some forward. Webb absent because he was in surgery, Hassan absent because he was in medical. Emily present and sitting at the far end of the table with a mug of something hot and her hands wrapped around it. Mitchell ran the debrief with his usual efficiency. Objective achieved, hostage recovered. Casualties 1 surgical non-life-threatening, no fatalities. Secondary objectives: the disruption of the ambush, the neutralization of the ridge team, the stopped reinforcement convoy, all confirmed. Then he stopped reading from the report and looked at the table. "I want to talk about what happened tonight," he said, "not the tactical elements. Those are in the report. I want to talk about what happened." Nobody said anything, which was itself something. At 23:47 hours, Mitchell said, Sierra 7 identified a compromised approach based on a thermal pattern that our equipment was not reading clearly due to storm interference. She rerouted us. If we had continued on the primary approach— He stopped, picked up his coffee, put it down. "We would have walked into a prepared kill zone with RPG coverage on the primary breach point and crossfire from the gate structure. The casualty assessment for that scenario is not a number I want to say out loud." The table was very quiet. At 23:51, she made a 600-meter shot in a blizzard at a communications antenna on a moving target-size object to prevent the ambush team from warning the compound. Mitchell paused. At approximately 00:03, she neutralized the roofline RPG position at 920 meters. 00:04, she disabled the lead vehicle of a reinforcement convoy at the same range. Between 00:07 and 00:09, she covered the flanking attempt on the extraction route while simultaneously maintaining target identification for the primary firefight. He looked up. Total confirmed eliminations from Overwatch 12. 12. The number sat on the table like something physical. Garza was looking at his hands. Torres was looking at the ceiling. Cruz had stopped moving entirely. 12, Mitchell said again, not for emphasis, just because it deserved to be said twice. In those conditions, at those ranges. He looked at Emily. Is there anything in your assessment that I've missed or misstated? Emily looked up from her mug. The convoy vehicle was 940 meters, not 920. The range shifted when they changed course trying to avoid the storm. I adjusted. She said it the way you corrected a typo, factually, without drama. Mitchell wrote something in his notes. Noted. He looked back at the table. I'm going to say something now that I don't normally say in debriefs. Because normally we debrief tactics and decisions and outcomes, and we save the other things for later or never. He paused. Every person on this team did their job tonight under extremely difficult and partially compromised conditions. I'm proud of that. What Sierra 7 did tonight is something I don't have a clean professional category for. It was beyond performance. It was beyond expectation. He looked at her again. Thank you. Emily looked at him steadily. You're welcome, Commander, she said. And then because she was Emily Carter and apparently incapable of leaving a significant moment without adding something precise and necessary to it, she said, I want to formally document my concern about the intelligence leak before this debrief closes. Mitchell nodded. On the record. Go ahead. She laid it out. The same point she had made to Greenberg on the tarmac, but more detailed, more specific with timestamps, and observed inconsistencies that she had been cataloging in her head while simultaneously running a 12-person Overwatch operation in a blizzard. The table listened. Garza, who had not looked at Emily directly since they'd landed, looked at her now. When she finished, the room was quiet again. Then Garza said, How long have you known? I've been suspicious since the pre-mission brief 2 days ago, Emily said. The intelligence felt curated, like someone had gone through it and removed the things that would make us reconsider the approach. Why didn't you push harder? Cruz asked. Not accusatory, genuinely wanting to know. Emily looked at him. Something moved across her face. I tried, she said. I was told the intelligence was sound. She didn't look at the door Greenberg had gone through. She didn't need to. I'm 15, she said. The people in that conversation have been doing this for 20 years. When they say stop, you stop. A pause. But I was right and we almost paid for it. So now it's documented. For next time, Torres said. For next time, she agreed. Garza leaned forward in his chair. He put his elbows on the table and he looked at Emily Carter for a long time the way he had looked at the compound wall. Before Reyes blew it, assessing, calculating, running his hands along the structure of something to find out where the integrity actually was. And then he said, I owe you an apology. Emily blinked. Just once. It was the most surprised she had looked all night. In the briefing room, Garza said, and on the comms, I was dismissive. I made judgments based on what I assumed instead of what I observed. That's not how I was trained, and it's not how I operate, and I did it anyway. He held her gaze. That won't happen again. The room was very, very quiet. Emily looked at him for a moment. Then she said, okay. Just that. Okay. Not thank you, not it's fine, not no problem. Just the simple acceptance of something that had been offered honestly. Garza nodded, leaned back. Mitchell looked at his notes. Debrief concluded. Get some sleep. Medical follow-up for anyone with physical injuries in 4 hours. He paused with his hand on the folder. That's an order, not a suggestion. Hawkins, that includes you. Hawk raised his good arm in acknowledgement. 2:20 a.m. He found Emily in the corridor outside the operations building, sitting on a low concrete step, with her back against the wall and the mug still in her hands, though it must have been cold by now. She had her eyes closed again. He thought about walking past, letting her have the quiet. But something stopped him. The same thing that had made him reach for the private comm channel in the drainage channel 6 hours ago, when he needed to know what she saw before he needed to tell him. He sat down on the step next to her. She opened her eyes. They sat there for a moment without speaking, the way you could sometimes sit with someone who had been through the same night and not need to establish the premise of the conversation. How's the arm? She asked. They stitched it. It's fine. He paused. How are you? She thought about that for longer than he expected, not evasively. She was actually considering the question, as if it were a genuine inquiry that deserved a genuine answer. I'm tired, she said finally. That's fair. Another silence. Webb's out of surgery, she said. I heard. He'll keep the leg. Good. She looked at the mug. He's annoying, but he means well. Hawk almost smiled. He grows on you. Like mold, she said. And there it was just for a second, something that might have been a real smile. Small dry there and gone like a heat signature in a compromised thermal. But real. Hawk let the silence run for a moment. Then he said, your father, Greenberg told me he trained you. The almost smile didn't exactly disappear. It just became something different, quieter. Yes, she said, he was good. He was the best I've ever seen, she said, and I've seen a lot. What happened to him? She looked at the mug for a while. A mission, she said, 2 years ago. He went out and he didn't come back. She paused. That's all Greenberg will tell me. Classified at a level I don't have access to yet. She said the last word in a particular way. Yet, not with bitterness, with the focused patience of someone who had made a decision about their future and was simply waiting for time to catch up to it. Is that why you do this? Hawk asked. She thought about it. Partly, she said. Partly it's because he trained me, and training is a debt. You pay it by doing what you were taught as well as you can. She paused again. And partly because someone has to. Hawk looked at the corridor wall. You're 15, he said, for the third time tonight, but this time it wasn't Webb's disbelief or even his own earlier weight of what it cost. This time it was something else, something closer to the question underneath the question. You are 15 years old and you came up here and you held this together for all of us. What does that feel like? My father was 19 the first time he went into a combat zone, Emily said. He said age was just the number of years you'd been practicing. She looked at Hawk. He practiced very hard, very fast. He made sure I did too. He sounds like he was something. He was, she said. And this time the quietness in her voice had a different quality, not controlled, just honest. The way grief was sometimes not loud, not performed, just there. A weight you carried so often that you'd learn to walk normally with it. They sat there another few minutes. The bass moved around them, distant sounds, vehicle engines, the procedural noise of a forward operating base at 2 a.m. Then Hawk said, for what it's worth, what you did tonight, I've been doing this for 16 years. I've worked with the best people this country trains. What you did tonight. He stopped, looked for the right words, and found that the right words were the simple ones. I wouldn't have made it out of that courtyard without you. None of us would. Emily looked at him, those dark, steady eyes. You would have found a way, she said. Maybe, he said, but you made it certain. That's different. She looked at the mug again. Thank you, she said quietly, genuinely. He nodded, got up. His left arm protested the movement, and he ignored it. Get some sleep, Sierra 7. She looked up at him, and there it was again, that small, dry, there and gone, almost smile. Yes, Senior Chief. He walked back toward the medical wing. He had gone about 20 feet when her voice came down the corridor after him. Calm, certain, the same voice that had been in his earpiece all night. Hawk, he turned. The mirror, she said. In my kit, there's a small cracked mirror. I used it tonight at the end on the ridge when the counter-sniper came in. She paused. It was my father's. He used to say it was the most important tool he carried, not the rifle, the mirror. Hawk waited. He said the rifle was how you solved the problem, Emily said. The mirror was how you found it. Most people only look at what's in front of them. The mirror shows you what's behind the thing you were looking at. She looked at the mug. He taught me to use it at 600 meters the first time. I was 9. Hawk stood in the corridor and thought about a 9-year-old learning to use a cracked mirror at 600 meters, and about a father who had understood that the thing behind the thing was always the real target, and about a mission 2 years ago from which that father had not returned, and about a 15-year-old who had carried that mirror into a blizzard in the Hindu Kush and used it exactly as she'd been taught at the moment it mattered most. Get some sleep, he said again, because there was nothing else to say that would fit in a corridor at 2 a.m. without taking up more space than the moment could hold. She nodded, closed her eyes. He kept walking, 3:08 a.m. He found Mitchell in the operations center, still at the table, still with a folder open, writing something by hand in the careful, deliberate way that Mitchell wrote things that were going to matter later. Hawk sat across from him and waited. Mitchell finished the sentence he was writing, looked up. "You talked to her." "For a few minutes," Hawk said. "How is she?" "Tired. Fine." He paused. "Better than she should be." Mitchell nodded, looked back at the page. "I'm writing the performance assessment now," he said. "I want to get the language right. These things become permanent records." He tapped the pen against the page twice. Asset Sierra 7 demonstrated precision and tactical judgment beyond any measured standard for active conditions. He said it slowly, like he was testing the weight of each word. "Is that accurate?" Hawk thought about the night. All of it. The running board, the drainage channel, the antenna, the roof line, the convoy, the ridge, the corridor. "It's accurate," he said. "It's also insufficient." "I know," Mitchell said, "but it's what I can put in a report." He paused. "The real record is what we carry out of here." Hawk looked at the fold term. She flagged a leak, formally in the debrief. "I heard her," Mitchell said. "I'm including it, with a priority flag." He looked up. "She was right about the intelligence being compromised. Someone is going to have to answer for that." Greenberg. Greenberg reported what he received. The problem is upstream of him. Mitchell closed the folder. "It always is." They sat for a moment. "She said her father trained her," Hawk said. 2 years ago, he went out and didn't come back." Mitchell looked at him. Something shifted in his face very slightly in the region around his eyes. The way it shifted when he knew something and was deciding how much of it to say. "I know about her father," he said, and that's a conversation for a different level of clearance and a different time of night," Mitchell said. "Not harshly, carefully. What I can tell you is that whoever he was, he did right by her. And that's not nothing." "She's 15, Ryan," Hawk said. Mitchell looked at him for a long time. "I know that Darnell," he said, and the use of his first name, which Mitchell almost never did outside of very specific moments, told Hawk that they were no longer in the professional register. They were in the other one, the one that didn't go in reports. "I think about that every time Greenberg sends me a mission package with her name on it. Every single time." He paused. "But I also thought about it tonight when she spotted the ambush and rerouted us before we walked into a kill zone. And I thought about it when she took out the RPG position that was going to drop you in that courtyard." He picked up his coffee, put it down. "There are no clean answers here. There's just what she can do and what we would lose if she wasn't there and what it cost her to be there. And none of those three things exist comfortably in the same conversation." "No," Hawk said, "they don't." "Get your arm looked at again," Mitchell said. "The stitches were field applied. The medical team needs to redo them properly." "In a minute." "Now, Hawkins." Hawk got up. His arm said something unpleasant in the language of torn muscle. He walked toward the door and stopped with his hand on the frame. "The report," he said. "When you file it, her name, does it stay classified?" "The asset designation stays classified," Mitchell said. "Sierra 7 is a compartmented identity." He looked down at the page again. "Emily Carter doesn't officially exist in this context." "But she does," Hawk said. "She absolutely does." "Yes," Mitchell said. He picked up his pen. "She absolutely does." Hawk walked out into the corridor and back toward the medical wing, and the base moved around him with its 3 a.m. procedural quietness, and somewhere down the hall in the opposite direction, on a low concrete step, a 15-year-old girl with a cracked mirror in her kit and a name that didn't officially exist, sat with her eyes closed and her hands wrapped around a coal mug, carrying a weight that nobody her age should have been carrying, with a stillness that nobody her age should have been able to maintain. And in the operations center, Commander Ryan Mitchell wrote her report by hand, word by careful word, finding the language that was accurate and insufficient, and the only kind of truth that a classified document could hold. And 12 men who had laughed 7 hours ago in a briefing room at Bagram, 11 of them now because one was in surgery with a bullet hole in his leg, were asleep or trying to sleep, or lying awake thinking about corridors and ridge lines, and the sound of a shot from 940 meters, arriving exactly where it needed to arrive, exactly when it needed to arrive there. None of them were laughing. 6:47 a.m. The sun was coming up somewhere behind the clouds, which meant the darkness had shifted from black to a gray that hurt the eyes differently. Bagram was transitioning from its nighttime operational tempo to its daytime one, which at a forward operating base mostly meant the same things happening in slightly better light. Hawk had slept 3 hours. His arm had been restitched by a medical officer who had expressed opinions about field suturing with the particular professional displeasure of someone who took neat work seriously. The arm was wrapped, now tight and deliberate, and it pulled when he moved, but it held. He was on his second coffee when Greenberg found him. Greenberg looked like he hadn't slept at all. His jacket was the same one from last night, and his eyes had the red-edged quality of a man who had spent the hours between 2 and 7 a.m. in a series of conversations he couldn't discuss in locations he couldn't name. He sat down across from Hawk without asking and put both hands flat on the table. "We found the leak," he said. Hawk set down his coffee. "Where?" "Kabul Station, a local national interpreter with access to the mission planning documents. He'd been turned 3 months ago." Greenberg's jaw tightened. He had full visibility on the Hassan extraction timeline, the primary approach corridor, and the breach methodology. 3 months, Hawk said. "No." He knew everything. "Everything we put in the written plan," Greenberg said, "which is why the compound was ready, why the ridge team was placed not patrolling, why the eastern wall was covered." He stopped. Emily was right. The intelligence wasn't wrong, it was curated. Someone went through it and removed the indicators that would have told us the operation was blown. "She flagged it 2 days before we left," Hawk said. Greenberg looked at the table. "I know. She told you something was wrong with the intelligence, and you sent us out anyway." "I sent you out because 3 levels above me made that call," Greenberg said, and his voice had something in it that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite shame, but was somewhere in the difficult territory between them. "I flagged her concern. I was told the mission was time-sensitive, and the intelligence had been reviewed, and the window couldn't wait." He pressed his hands flatter against the table. "Emily was right. The people above me were wrong. And 11 of your people walked into a prepared killing ground because of it." Hawk picked up his coffee again. He didn't drink it. He just held it. "She knew," he said. "She knew before we left that something was off, and she went anyway." "She always goes," Greenberg said quietly. "That's the thing about her. She flags the problem, she documents the concern, and then she goes. Because she knows that if she doesn't go, someone else does, and doesn't come back." He looked up. Her father was the same way. "Tell me about her father," Hawk said. Greenberg looked at him for a long time. Then he said, "His name was Daniel Carter. He was a paramilitary officer, SAD Special Activities Division. He was one of the 3 best marksmen the agency had seen in 40 years of keeping records on such things." A pause. "He started training Emily when she was 4 years old. Not with weapons, with observation, pattern recognition. He used to take her to public places and ask her to tell him everything she noticed that other people didn't. She was extraordinary at it by age 6. Another pause. "The weapons training came later, when she was old enough to understand what they were for. He brought his daughter up to do this," Hawk said. "He brought his daughter up to survive," Greenberg said. "There's a difference. He knew what his life looked like. He knew the odds. He made a decision that if something happened to him, she needed to be able to function in the world he operated in." Something moved across Greenberg's face. He loved her very much. The training was an act of love in its way, even if it doesn't look like one from the outside. "What happened to him?" "January 2 years ago, a mission in a location I can't specify. He went in as part of a 4-person element. The mission was compromised, sound familiar, and the extraction failed. 3 of the 4 came out." Greenberg stopped. "Daniel Carter was not one of them." The words landed on the table like the specific kind of weight that didn't make a sound. "She was 13, Hawk said. "Yes. And 6 months after that, she was in the field." 4 months, Greenberg said. "She presented herself to the agency with her father's training records, his field notes, his evaluations, and a range assessment she had conducted herself at 800 meters that broke every benchmark we had for that distance." He looked at Hawk. "She said, and I'm quoting this because I have the transcript, she said, 'My father trained me to do what he did. He's gone. The work isn't. I'm here. Use me or don't, but I'm not going anywhere.'" Hawk sat with that for a moment. "She was 13 years old," he said. "She was 13 years old." Greenberg confirmed. And there was not a single person in that room who could find the argument that made her wrong. 7:20 a.m. Webb was awake. The surgery had gone clean. The round had passed through the outer edge of the thigh without hitting the femoral, which the surgical team described as fortunate, and Webb described with a specific colorful vocabulary that suggested he was feeling better. He was in a bed in the medical wing with his leg elevated and his phone in his hand, and the expression of a man who was bored in the specific way that post-surgical patients got bored, which was different from regular boredom because it had nowhere to go. Emily was sitting in the chair beside his bed. Hawk stopped in the doorway and watched for a moment before either of them noticed him. I'm just saying, Webb was saying, you could have told me before we left that you were actually, that good. Would it have changed anything? Emily said. Webb thought about it. Honestly, probably not. I still would have thought it was insane to bring a kid on. He stopped himself, looked at her. Sorry, that came out wrong. It came out accurate, Emily said. It is insane to bring someone my age into a combat zone. It's also what happened and we're both alive, so. Yeah, Webb said. He shifted his leg and made a sound that was trying very hard not to be a wince. How many times have you done this missions like last night? Operational details are classified, yeah, I figured. He looked at her. Can you tell me anything? She thought about it. More than last night, less than I should have at my age. Webb absorbed that. Does it get easier? The question hung in the air between them. Emily looked at him with those steady eyes, and Hawk could see her deciding which version of the truth to give. Some parts, she said finally, the calculation gets faster, the technique gets cleaner. Your body stops spending energy on things that don't matter. She paused. The other parts don't get easier, they get quieter, which isn't the same thing. Webb looked at her for a moment. Your dad, he said carefully. Greenberg mentioned last night, before we left, he said something about how you were trained. My father, Emily said. Yes. Is he back? Yes, she said. Webb was quiet, then, I'm sorry. Thank you, she said. Genuine, clean, no performance around it. How do you, Webb started, stopped, tried again. How do you keep doing it after that? How do you keep going back out? Emily looked at the wall above his bed for a moment, not avoiding the question, looking for the true answer rather than the easy one. Because he taught me that the mission doesn't stop because you're in pain, she said. He used to say that stopping when it hurts is a luxury that the people depending on you can't afford. A pause. I used to argue with him about that when I was little. I used to say it wasn't fair. She paused again. He said fair wasn't the measure. Necessary was the measure. That's heavy for a little kid, Webb said. He was a heavy person, Emily said, and something in her voice when she said it, not sad exactly, but specific. The specific weight of someone you carried permanently. In the best way, Hawk stepped into the room. Both of them looked up. How's the leg? He asked Webb. Attached, Webb said, which I'm told makes me lucky. You are lucky. Hawk looked at Emily. Greenberg wants a secondary debrief. An hour. About the leak, she said. About what you observed regarding the intelligence inconsistencies. He wants the formal record. She nodded, got up from the chair, looked at Webb. Get some sleep. I slept for 3 hours, he said. Sleep more, she said. Your body is repairing itself. Sleep is how it does that fastest. You need 4 to 6 more hours minimum. She said it with the same matter-of-fact precision she used for everything, and Webb stared at her like she'd said something unexpectedly kind, which Hawk supposed she had. Yeah, okay, Webb said, and he sounded for just a second like a person who was grateful to be told what to do by someone who was clearly going to be right about it. 8:15 a.m. The secondary debrief was in a smaller room with a recording device and a man Hawk didn't know sitting next to Greenberg. The man had the particular quality of institutional seniority that didn't announce itself, no insignia, no introduction, just presence. The kind of presence that meant decisions. Emily sat across from them. Hawk had been asked to observe. He sat against the wall and stayed quiet. The man who hadn't been introduced said, Miss Carter, I've reviewed Commander Mitchell's report and the primary debrief transcript. Before we go to the intelligence concerns you flagged, I want to ask you about a specific moment in the operation. He opened a folder, At 0003 hours, you identified and neutralized a rooftop RPG position at 920 meters. In a blizzard, at night. 940, Emily said. He looked up. The report says 20. The report is based on my preliminary estimate. I recalculated based on the vehicle displacement when they rerouted. It was 40. He wrote something. That's the second time you've corrected the distance upward. Accuracy matters, she said. It does, he said, and something in his tone shifted just slightly. Not impressed or not only impressed. More like a man who was confirming something he'd already suspected. Walk me through the counter-sniper engagement. On the ridge, the final position. Emily was still for a moment. Then she said, at approximately 0014, I became aware of a secondary shooter on the ridge. Not one of the 5 I had been tracking. Different. The positioning was too deliberate, the timing between movements too precise. Someone trained. How did you ID him? His breathing pattern, she said. In very cold air, breath is visible. His intervals were too regular for someone under combat stress. He was in a controlled rhythm, a sniper's rhythm. She paused. He'd found my general position. He was working to narrow it down. What did you do? I stopped moving. Completely. I controlled my breathing and I went flat, and I did not generate any heat signature beyond what the terrain itself was producing. A pause, and then I used the mirror. Tell me about the mirror, the man said. My father's technique, Emily said. A small cracked mirror angled at 17 degrees. You use it to observe your own position from outside your own position. You see what your opponent sees instead of what you see. She said it the way you explain something that was obvious once you understood it and impossible until you did. He was looking for a heat signature, a movement, a shape that didn't match the terrain. The mirror let me see where he would logically look first, and then I moved to where he wouldn't look second. You moved while a trained counter-sniper was actively hunting you. Yes. At night, in a blizzard. Yes. And then you took the shot. At 1,112 meters. She said, yes. The room was quiet for a moment. The man looked at Greenberg. Greenberg looked at his folder. Neither of them said anything for a beat that was long enough to mean something. Then the man looked back at Emily. Miss Carter, he said, the mirror technique you just described is a classified methodology developed by Special Activities Division approximately 18 years ago. It was taught to a very small number of operators. The documentation on it is restricted to top secret level. He paused. How did you learn it? My father taught me, Emily said. And who taught your father? Emily looked at him. He never said, but he used it his whole career, and he taught it to me when I was 9 years old, and last night it saved 7 lives. Her voice was level. I'd say the classification status is secondary to the outcome. The man held her gaze for a long moment. Then almost imperceptibly, something in his face gave way, not quite a smile, but the edge of one, the kind that meant right answer. The intelligence inconsistencies, he said. Let's go through them. 9:40 a.m. It took an hour and 20 minutes. Emily laid out everything, the satellite imagery anomalies, the pattern of life data gaps, the too clean intelligence package, the ridge positioning that could only be explained by advance warning. She spoke from memory with timestamps without notes, and the recording device captured every word. When she finished, the man who had not been introduced closed his folder and looked at Greenberg and said, the interpreter in Kabul. Already in custody, Greenberg said. The handlers who approved the intelligence package over her objection. Being reviewed. Good. He stood up. He gathered nothing because he had nothing to gather. He looked at Emily. Miss Carter, you've had approximately 3 hours of sleep. You conducted a 9-hour mission in severe weather conditions. You identified a compromised operation, rerouted a SEAL team, neutralized 12 enemy positions, stopped a reinforcement convoy, and then sat in a debrief and provided a 40-minute intelligence assessment that is going to be used to investigate a security breach that went undetected for 3 months. He paused. How are you? Emily blinked again. The same single blink as in the debrief room. The tell that meant she was genuinely surprised by something. I'm fine, she said. That's not what I asked, he said. She looked at him. He held her gaze, and there was something in his expression that was not the evaluation of an asset or the assessment of a capability. It was something closer to the way a person looked at another person when they were actually asking. Emily looked at her hands. I'm tired, she said, the same words she had used with Hawk at 2 in the morning. But now there was something underneath it, something that the 3 a.m. version hadn't had. Or maybe it had been there then too, and she had simply been better at keeping it below the surface. "I'm tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix," she said very quietly. The man nodded. He said nothing for a moment. "Then your father used to say the same thing." Emily looked up fast. The steadiness in her eyes fractured just for a second, just long enough to see through it to what was underneath. Then it closed again. "You knew him," she said. "I knew him well," the man said. "He was one of the best people I've ever worked with and one of the best people I've ever known. The two things are not always the same, but in his case they were." He paused. "He talked about you constantly. He was very proud." Emily said nothing, but her hands flat on the table pressed down slightly, the smallest possible anchor. "He asked me once," the man said, "what I would do if something happened to him regarding you. I told him I would make sure you were looked after." A pause. "I'm aware I have not fully honored that commitment. I'm aware that being looked after should not mean being sent into combat zones at 15. I hold that contradiction and I don't have a clean resolution for it." He looked at her directly. "What I can tell you is that what you did last night will not go unrecognized. Not just in the report, in the ways that matter more than reports." He walked to the door, stopped with his hand on the frame, which was apparently where the real conversations happened at Bagram, Hawk thought. "Rest," he said. "That's not a suggestion either." He walked out. Emily sat at the table for a moment. She was very still. Then she said to the empty room, or to Greenberg, or to no one in particular, "He knew my father." "Yes," Greenberg said gently. "Why didn't he say so before?" "Because he needed to see you for himself first," Greenberg said. "He needed to know that what Daniel told him about you was real and not just a father's assessment of his own child." A pause. "It was real." Emily looked at the recording device on the table. "Who is he?" "Someone who matters," Greenberg said. "That's all I can say right now." She nodded, got up. Hawk fell into step beside her as they walked out into the corridor, and they walked for a moment in the quiet that had been between them before, the kind that didn't need to be explained. "You okay?" he asked. "He knew my father," she said again. Not to Hawk, just processing it, putting it somewhere she could hold it. "Yeah," Hawk said. "He said he was proud," she said. "Fathers usually are," Hawk said. "The good ones." She didn't say anything to that. She walked and Hawk walked beside her, and after a moment she said, "The mission tonight, the thing I did wrong." He looked at her. "What did you do wrong?" "I should have pushed harder on the intelligence concern," she said. "I flagged it and I accepted the response and I went anyway. My father would have pushed harder. He would have found the way to make them hear it without giving them the option of overruling it." She looked at the floor as she walked. "I was too deferential. Because I'm 15 and they have 20 years, and I thought the seniority gradient was real." "It is real," Hawk said. "Not when you're right," she said. "He told me that. If you are certain, you make them certain. You don't wait for permission to be believed." She paused. "I waited. People almost died because I waited." "People didn't die," Hawk said, "because of you." "This time," she said. He didn't have an answer for that, because she was right and she knew she was right, and the next time she would push harder and they would either listen or they wouldn't, and she would document it and go anyway, because that was who she was. That was who he had made her, Daniel Carter, in whatever time he had before January 2 years ago. The corridor opened into the main operations area where the day shift was running, and the base was fully awake, and the night felt like something that had happened in a different dimension, except that Webb was in a bed in the medical wing, and Hawk's arm was stitched, and the record was on tape, and Mitchell's report was in the system. 11:03 a.m. Hawk was back in the debrief room when Torres found him. Torres sat down, crossed his arms, and said without preamble, "Did you know before last night? Did Greenberg tell you how good she was?" "No," Hawk said. "I knew she had range scores. I didn't know what those scores meant under pressure." "Nobody did," Torres said. "That's the thing." He shook his head. 940 meters, in a blizzard, at a moving vehicle. He said it the way you said a number that was technically inside the laws of physics, but tested your confidence in them. "I've been doing this for 12 years. I've seen shooters, real shooters, people who are exceptional." "And," Hawk said. "And I've never seen anything like that," Torres said. "Not in training, not in the field, not from anyone." He paused. She's 15. I know. What does that mean? Torres asked. Not rhetorically, actually wanting the answer. What does it mean that the best operator any of us has ever seen is 15 years old and has a dead father and a classified identity and gets sent out with teams who laugh at her in the briefing room? Hawk thought about Daniel Carter, who had trained his daughter with a cracked mirror and a philosophy about what fairness was worth under fire. He thought about the man who hadn't given his name, who had known Daniel and had made a promise and was still working out how to keep it. He thought about Emily sitting on a concrete step at 2 in the morning with a cold mug and her eyes closed. It means the world is what it is, Hawk said, and she's choosing to be in it as fully as she can, given what she was given and what she lost. Torres was quiet for a moment. Garza apologized to her, he said. I heard. Garza doesn't apologize, Torres said. In 12 years, I've seen Garza apologize twice. Both times were significant. Yes, Hawk said. They were. 12:30 p.m., Emily was on the range. Not because she had been ordered to. Not for evaluation, not for calibration. She was on the range because it was where she went when she needed to think, which was something she had inherited from her father, along with the cracked mirror and the 17-degree angle and the philosophy about necessity. She had set a target at 800 meters. She was shooting from a seated position, no rest, and she was firing one round every 90 seconds. Not fast, deliberate. Each shot placed with the specific attention of someone who was not trying to hit a target, but trying to talk to something that was not in the room. Hawk watched from the edge of the range for a few minutes. She didn't miss. Not once. Not at any point. The grouping on the target when he looked through the spotting scope was the size of a playing card, at 800 meters. He thought about the briefing room, the laughter, the 4 seconds of confusion and assumption and dismissal that had run through 11 trained men when they saw what she was. He thought about how complete that dismissal had been and how wrong and how expensive it could have been. He thought about the things she had said to Greenberg on the tarmac. Luck is not a method. She fired another round, 90-second interval. The target did not care and did not offer feedback and did not require anything from her except what she already had. He understood watching her why she was here. There was no calculation to do on this range, no ambush to predict, no leak to document, no grief to carry, while also being steady enough for 12 other people to depend on. There was the rifle and the distance and the result. It was, he supposed, the closest thing she had to rest. He turned and walked back toward the operations center, and behind him, the range was quiet except for the one shot every 90 seconds rhythm of a 15-year-old who had saved 11 lives in a blizzard and was now in the only way available to her, being simply and completely herself. 1:47 p.m. Mitchell called Hawk into his office, a private one which at a forward operating base was a room with a door and 2 chairs, and that was roughly the full extent of its privacy infrastructure. He had the folder open again. He looked like he had slept some and decided it wasn't enough and made peace with that. I filed the primary report, he said. Greenberg's office is handling the intelligence breach documentation. The man from this morning, he glanced at Hawk, has apparently been on the phone with Langley for the last 4 hours. What's going to happen? Hawk asked. To the leak consequences, real ones. Mitchell looked at the folder. To the operation, it goes in the record as successful. Hostage recovered, 0 fatalities. Secondary objectives exceeded. A pause. To Emily. He stopped. What about Emily? Hawk said. Mitchell looked at him. The man from this morning, his name is Calloway, Director-level Special Activities. He was Daniel Carter's direct supervisor and, based on what I understand, his closest friend. He paused. He wants to formalize Emily's operational status. Hawk went very still. What does that mean? It means moving her from support asset classification to full operational standing, with all the resources, training, infrastructure, and mission access that goes with it. Mitchell held his gaze. It also means she continues to do what she did last night, operationally, officially, with full institutional backing. She's 15, Hawk said. I know. That's not Ryan. That's not... I know, Mitchell said again, and his voice had the weight of a man who had been sitting with this exact conversation in his head for the last several hours. I know what it is. I know what it costs her. I know what it means. He paused. I also know what she said to Calloway this morning in that debrief room about being tired in a way sleep doesn't fix. And I know that Calloway heard that and he's still recommending the formalization. Because she's too good not to use, Hawk said, flat, not an accusation, just the truth of it. Because she has made a decision about her life, Mitchell said carefully. She has decided with full understanding of what it means to be here. She made that decision at 13, and she's made it again every day since. He looked at the folder. Calloway's argument is that formalizing her status actually gives her more protection than the current arrangement. Right now, she's a support asset. She operates in a gray zone. If something goes wrong, he stopped. Hawk understood what he wasn't saying. If something went wrong with a support asset in a gray zone, the paperwork was complicated, and the accountability was distributed, and the family, except she didn't have family, she had Greenberg and Calloway in a classified file. The family had very little recourse. Full operational status means she's covered, Hawk said. Completely, Mitchell said. Medical, legal, institutional. And it means the people sending her out can't wave her off the way Greenberg was waved off 2 days ago when she flagged the intelligence concern. Her assessment carries formal weight. He paused. It's not a clean answer. There is no clean answer, but it might be a more honest one. Hawk sat with it, turned it over, looked at all the sides. Does she know? Calloway is meeting with her at 3, Mitchell said. And what does she want? Mitchell looked at him. What do you think she wants? Hawk thought about the range. 1 shot every 90 seconds. The playing card grouping at 800 meters. The cracked mirror. The concrete step at 2 a.m. The cold mug. I'm tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix. The decision made at 13 that had been remade every day since. She wants to do the work, he said. Yes, Mitchell said. She wants to do the work. 2:58 p.m. Hawk was in the corridor outside the meeting room when Calloway arrived. The man moved with the quietness of someone who had spent decades not being noticed in rooms and courted it into a kind of second nature. He stopped when he saw Hawk. They looked at each other for a moment. She's in there? Calloway asked. Yes, Hawk said. Calloway nodded, started toward the door, stopped. Commander Mitchell speaks very highly of you, he said. He's generous, Hawk said. He's accurate, Calloway said. He looked at the door. I want to ask you something, as someone who was with her last night. Not as an assessment, just as a person who was there. Hawk waited. Do you think she's all right? Calloway asked. And his voice for the first time carried something that had nothing to do with institutional standing or mission parameters. It carried the specific concern of a man who had made a promise to a friend and was trying imperfectly under difficult circumstances to keep it. Honestly, Hawk thought about everything, all of it. Then he said, she's extraordinary, and she's carrying more than she should have to carry. Both of those things are completely true at the same time. He paused. She needs someone who knew her father to tell her that he was proud. She needs to hear it more than once. And she needs someone to push back on the people who wave off her assessments because of her age, not just after the fact, but before. He held Calloway's gaze. She needs someone in her corner who has the weight to make that count. Calloway listened to all of it. Then he said, that's why I'm here. He opened the door and walked in. Hawk stayed in the corridor. He leaned against the wall and he waited, and he thought about what was going to be decided in that room, and about a girl with a cracked mirror, and a dead father, and 12 confirmed eliminations, and a voice that stayed steady at 940 meters in a blizzard. He thought about the laughter in the briefing room at Bagram 18 hours ago. And he thought about how much had changed since then. Not in the world exactly. The world was the same world. The mountains were the same mountains. The cold was the same cold. What had changed was the understanding of what was already there. 3:04 p.m. Hawk didn't go far. He stayed in the corridor with his back against the wall, and his good arm crossed over the wrapped one, and he waited the way he had learned to wait in 16 years of doing things that required waiting. Not passive, not empty, but active in the stillness. Listening to what the quiet told him. Through the door, he couldn't hear words. He could hear the rhythm of a conversation. Calloway's voice was low and measured the way it had been all morning. Emily's was quieter, not hesitant, just contained. The way she was always contained, the way her father had apparently been. Torres came around the corner, saw Hawk standing there and slowed. He looked at the door, then at Hawk. Meet, he said. Yeah. About her status, yeah. Torres leaned against the opposite wall. He didn't leave. They stood there on opposite sides of the corridor, like two people bookending something important, which was essentially what they were doing. Garza's been quiet all day, Torres said. Garza's thinking, Hawk said. Garza thinks loud. When he's actually quiet, it means he's decided something. Hawk looked at the door. What do you think he's decided? I think he's decided she's one of us, Torres said, simply. I think last night finished that conversation permanently, and now he's working out what to do with the fact that he almost didn't get to know that because he wrote her off in a briefing room before she opened her mouth. Hawk nodded. That sounded right. He's not good at being wrong, Torres said. Nobody is, Hawk said. He's better at admitting it than most. That's the difference. They stood for another minute. The corridor moved around them, people passing the operational day, continuing Bagram, doing what Bagram did. And then the door opened. Calloway came out first. He looked at Hawk and something in his face had settled. Not resolved. This was not the kind of thing that resolved, but settled. The way a man's face settled when he had said what he came to say and heard what he needed to hear, and now had work to do. She wants a few minutes, he said. Of course, Hawk said. Calloway looked at Torres, who he had not met, and Torres looked back at him, and Calloway said, You were on the mission last night. Yes, sir, Torres said. Thank you, Calloway said, meaning it, all of it. The whole night compressed into 2 words. He walked away down the corridor. Torres watched him go. Then he looked at Hawk. Who is that someone who matters, Hawk said, using the Greenberg's words, because they were still the right ones. 3:19 p.m. Emily came out of the meeting room at exactly 3:19. Hawk knew because he checked his watch when the door opened the way he timed everything the habit of 16 years. She stood in the doorway for a moment, one hand on the frame, and she looked at him. Her eyes were different. Not red, she hadn't been crying, or if she had, it was the kind of crying that left no visible evidence, which he suspected was the only kind she allowed herself. But different. Something in them that had shifted. Like a weight that had been in one position for 2 years had been moved, not removed, but moved to a place where it sat differently. You waited, she said. Yeah, he said. She came out into the corridor. Torres pushed off the wall, gave her a nod that said everything. His 12 years of doing this had taught him to put into a nod and walked away. Just like that. Exactly the right thing. Hawk looked at her. You okay? She thought about it the way she thought about everything. Actually. He told me things about my father, she said. Things I didn't know. She paused. Missions he'd been on, decisions he'd made, the kind of person he was when nobody was watching. Good things, Hawk asked. Complicated things, she said. He was complicated, he was good and complicated, and he made hard choices, and some of them he regretted, and some of them he would make again. She looked at the floor. Calloway said he used to call in after missions, and the first thing he always asked about was me. For the debrief, before the report, before anything. He'd ask how I was doing, what I was working on, whether I'd been eating enough. She stopped, took a breath. I didn't know that. Hawk didn't say anything. There was nothing to add to that. It was complete on its own. He's recommending full operational status, she said. I know, Hawk said. Mitchell told me. He said it would give me more protection, more weight when I flag something, more accountability on the people who send me out. She looked up. He also said it would mean more missions, more exposure, more risk. A pause. He was honest about that. He didn't dress it up. What did you tell him? Hawk asked. Emily looked at the wall. I told him I needed to think about it, she said. That surprised him, just slightly. He had expected, based on everything he'd seen, everything she'd said, the range at 12:30, with the playing card grouping, he had expected her to say yes immediately, the same way she'd said yes at 13. That's the right answer, he said. She looked at him. Yes, he said. Taking time to think about a decision that size is not hesitation. It's respect for what you're deciding. He held her gaze. Your father would tell you the same thing. Something moved across her face. Quick. Real. There and gone. How do you know what my father would say? Because Calloway just spent 15 minutes telling you what kind of person he was when nobody was watching, Hawk said. And the person Calloway described is the same person who taught you that precision was discipline under pressure, who taught you to use a cracked mirror instead of assuming you already knew the angles, who taught you to document the concern and keep pushing until someone heard it. He paused. That person would want you to take the time. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He used to tell me that the most dangerous operator in any room was the one who stopped questioning their own decisions." A pause. He said certainty without examination was just arrogance with better aim. "Smart man," Hawk said. "Yes," she said. "He was." 4:02 p.m. Greenberg found them both in the operations center where Emily had been going over topographical data for reasons she described as academic and Hawk suspected were less academic than that. He came in with his jacket still from last night and his eyes still red-edged in a folder that was new. "There's a situation," he said. Hawk looked at him. "What kind?" Greenberg put the folder on the table. He looked at Emily first. "You're not on this. You're in a rest and recovery window after last night, Calloway's orders." "What's the situation?" Emily said, not moving. "Separate team, Eastern Province. They've got a ground element pinned at a firebase insurgent force larger than anticipated air support is 30 minutes out, and they have 3 wounded. They cannot move." He paused. "They're requesting Overwatch support. Their own sniper element is down." Hawk was already reading the folder. "How pinned?" "Completely," Greenberg said. "They can hold the perimeter, but they cannot break the pressure, and they cannot get the wounded to the extraction point without someone suppressing the high ground positions." The room was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then Emily said, "What are the high ground positions?" "Emily," Greenberg started. "What are the positions, Greenberg?" she said. Not louder, just more definite. The voice she used when she was done with the preliminary version of the conversation. Greenberg looked at her, then he looked at Hawk. Hawk said nothing because this was not his call and he knew it. Greenberg turned back to Emily. 4 positions, approximately 700 to 900 meters from the firebase perimeter. Elevated. They've got effective fire on the courtyard and the medevac landing zone. As long as those positions are active, the wounded stay where they are. Emily stood up. She looked at Hawk. "How long to get me there?" "Emily, you're in a recovery," Greenberg said. "Calloway's orders," she said. "I know. Is Calloway reachable right now?" "He's in a secure call with..." "Then we have a decision to make before he's reachable," she said. 3 people are wounded and can't move and have 30 minutes before air support and an unknown time before their situation becomes unrecoverable. She looked at Greenberg with those dark, steady eyes. "I can be at a viable Overwatch position in 20 minutes. I have the range for all 4 targets. Tell me what you need from me." Greenberg pressed his hands flat on the table, a thing he apparently did when the world was asking him to make a decision he hadn't budgeted for. "I need written acknowledgement that you're volunteering against standing recovery orders," he said. "Done," Emily said. She pulled a page from the folder and wrote 4 lines on the back of it and signed it, fast and clean. Then she pushed it back to him. He looked at it, looking at her. "You're 15 years old," he said, and this time it wasn't dismissal or disbelief. It was the sound of a man who cared about something and was scared for it. "I know," she said gently. "I know you're worried. Document the concern. Then give me the grid coordinates." He gave her the grid coordinates. 4:37 p.m. The firebase was called Sentinel-3. It sat in a valley that the wind had apparently decided to make its permanent residence because the gusting was constant and variable, and the kind of meteorological problem that made long-range shooting a conversation between physics and stubbornness. Emily had the rifle set up in 11 minutes. Hawk was beside her, not as backup, not as handler, but because when Greenberg had started organizing the support flight, Hawk had simply gotten on it and nobody had told him not to. His arm pulled against the stitches when he moved, and he had decided sometime in the last 6 hours that this was information he would acknowledge later. The firebase was audible before it was visible. The distinct percussion of a sustained firefight, not the explosive chaos of a breach or an ambush, but the grinding, methodical exchange of a position under pressure. Return fire suppression, return fire. The rhythm of people who were holding on by the measure of what they had left. "I have the firebase," Emily said. She was already settled, already still the rifle finding its natural position against her shoulder, the way a compass found north. I see the southern perimeter. I see the medevac zone. A pause. I see the 3 wounded. Hawk looked through his scope. He could see them 2 men down, one propped against a wall, a third kneeling beside them applying pressure to something. The courtyard between them and the landing zone was 30 meters of open ground that was currently being covered by fire from the high positions. 30 meters that might as well have been 30 miles. I'm finding the 4 positions, Emily said. Take your time, Hawk said. I don't have time, she said, but I'll be accurate anyway. He almost smiled. Yes, you will. First position, North Ridge, 740 meters. Single shooter, disciplined spacing. She paused. Second position, East face, 880 meters. 2 individuals, one appears to be spotting. Another pause. Third position, I see it. South Ridge extension, 910 meters. 1 shooter elevated. She went quiet for longer this time. Fourth position, I'm still looking. Take what you have, Hawk said. 3 positions down buys them time. 4 positions down buys them certainty, she said. And I told you, luck is not a method. He waited. 43 seconds. He counted. Fourth position, she said. North Ridge, second elevation, behind the rock formation. He's been still too long. He's waiting. A pause. He's good. Better than the counter sniper last night, Hawk asked. Different, she said. Trained differently. He's patient, but he's also predictable. He's expecting return fire from the firebase direction. He's not accounting for an angle from the west. Which is where we are, Hawk said. Yes, she said. I'll take him last. Once I start on the others, he'll adjust. I need him to adjust before I can confirm the revised position and take the shot. That's a narrow window, Hawk said. It's enough, she said. She fired. 4:49 p.m. The first position went silent at 4:49 and 12 seconds. Hawk was watching through the spotting scope and he saw the change at the firebase before he confirmed the hit. The volume of incoming fire dropped and a figure on the southern perimeter stood slightly higher than he had been crouching, which was what people did when the immediate pressure reduced and hope introduced itself back into the equation. 12 seconds between shots. Emily had told him once he had found it in the margins of a training document Greenberg had left on the table that the space between shots was where the shooter lived or died. Too fast and you were reacting instead of deciding. Too slow and the target moved or the window closed. 12 seconds was her number, the interval her father had drilled into her at distances that made 12 seconds feel like a year. Second shot, the east face position, 880 meters with a crosswind that had shifted twice in the last 4 minutes. The spotting came before the fire from that position stopped. A single brief lateral movement of the scope, then stillness. Then the firing from the east face reduced to 1 shooter instead of 2, and then stopped entirely 6 seconds later. Third position, Emily said. Her voice had that quality it got when she was deep in it. Not flat, not robotic, but stripped of everything that wasn't essential. Like a signal with all the interference removed. 910 meters. Wind is shifting, adjusting. A pause. He moved. How far, Hawk said. 2 meters left. He heard the first 2 shots. He's repositioning to a better cover angle. A pause. It's not better. He thinks it is. She fired. Silence from the South Ridge extension. Fourth position, she said immediately. He's adjusting. Come on, she said very quietly. Not to Hawk, not to anyone in the operational sense. To herself or to the physics of it, or to the ghost of the training that had put her here. Come on, show me where you go. Hawk watched through the scope. At the firebase, something was happening. The figure on the southern perimeter was talking into a radio. Another figure came out of the eastern door of the main building, slowly, carefully staying low but moving, testing the change in pressure. Don't move yet, Emily said, not into the comm, just quietly, into the air. Watching the firebase through the scope the way you watch someone take a step toward the edge of something. The figure stopped moving, as if they'd heard her. Fourth position, she said again. He adjusted twice. He's now approximately 6 meters from his original position behind the secondary rock formation. He's going to fire again in, she stopped. Now. The shot from the fourth position came down range toward the firebase. It hit the exterior wall 3 feet from the figure who had started to move. The figure dropped back into cover. He's confirmed, Emily said. Do you have him? Hawk said. I have him, she said. A pause that lasted exactly the amount of time it took. She fired. The fourth position went silent, 5:03 p.m. The firebase erupted, not in fire and movement. The moment the fourth position stopped, the perimeter team knew what it meant before anyone told them, because they had been in that courtyard listening to those four positions for however long this had been going on, and they knew the sound of all four of them, and now there was a different sound, which was no sound, and no sound meant something had changed. The ground element crossed the courtyard in 20 seconds, two carrying one, the third moving under his own power but leaning on a fourth. They reached the landing zone. The medevac was already on approach. Hawk could hear it, that particular thrum of rotors that in certain contexts was the best sound in the world. Firebase Sentinel-3, this is Overwatch, Emily said into the tactical comm for the first time. Her voice was the same voice it always was. 4 high ground positions neutralized. LZ is clear. You have a window. A voice came back immediately from the firebase. Male, slightly breathless, with the specific quality of a man who had been in a firefight for long enough that normal emotional responses had been temporarily suspended and were now suddenly and forcefully resuming. Overwatch 1, yeah, we copy. Who am I talking to? Emily looked at Hawk. He looked at her. He said nothing because this was her call and he knew it. She clicked the comm. Sierra 7, she said. A pause from the firebase. Then copy that, Sierra 7, we owe you. Another pause. We owe you a significant amount. Get your people out, she said. That's enough. She clicked off. The medevac landed, the wounded went on, the ground element followed. 6 minutes and 40 seconds from the moment the fourth position went silent to the moment the medevac lifted. Hawk watched it go. Then he looked at Emily. She was still in her position. Still. The rifle still at her shoulder, still covering the 4 positions that no longer needed covering. He understood why. You stayed until it was done. You didn't move until the people you were covering were out of the effective range of whatever you had neutralized. Her father's training, deep in the structure of how she operated. They're clear, he said. She lowered the rifle. She sat back from the position. She looked at the sky, not at anything, not tracking anything, just at the sky, and she took one long, slow breath. Then she started to break down the rifle. 4:28 p.m. Calloway was on the phone when they landed back at Bagram. He was pacing the corridor outside the operations center, the phone to his ear, and the expression of a man receiving information in real time that was rearranging his afternoon. He saw Emily coming and held up one finger. Wait, and kept pacing. Greenberg was at the operations center door. He looked at Emily. He looked at Hawk. He said, the firebase team commander is already filing a commendation report. She doesn't need a commendation report, Hawk said. No, Greenberg said, but the record does. He looked at Emily. 4 positions, 700 to 910 meters, variable crosswind conditions. He paused. Calloway is going to want to discuss the recovery order violation. I know, Emily said. He's not going to be angry, Greenberg said, and his voice carried something that was almost fond, almost. He's going to be, he stopped, looked for the word, he's going to be exactly who he's been all day. Emily looked at the door. Complicated, proud, Greenberg said. Worried, both at the same time, in that order. She nodded slowly. Then she said, 3 people came home tonight who might not have. Yes, Greenberg said. That's the measure, she said. My father said the mission isn't what you're asked to do. It's what the outcome requires. She paused. The outcome required it. Greenberg looked at her for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, he would have done the same thing in the exact same situation. I know, she said. Calloway came off the phone. He walked toward her and stopped, and he looked at her with a particular expression of someone managing several large and competing feelings simultaneously and choosing not to let any of them win outright. You violated a recovery order, he said. Yes, she said, against my explicit instruction. Yes. I need you to understand that there are protocols that exist for 3 people are alive who were pinned under fire waiting for a medevac window, she said. Not combative, not defensive, just the fact of it placed carefully between them like something that needed to be accounted for. I had the range and the time and the capacity. The protocols would have cost them the window. Calloway looked at her. Something in his jaw moved. He was Hawk could see doing the same thing Mitchell did running the calculation, weighing the source against the outcome, against the cost of the alternative. You can reprimand me, Emily said. You can document the violation. I'll sign whatever needs to be signed. A pause. But I would make the same decision again. I know you would, Calloway said. And something in his voice had shifted. The disciplinary register was still there underneath, but something else had come to the surface. Something that sounded like the man who had called Daniel Carter his friend. That's what makes this complicated. Everything about this is complicated, Emily said. Yes, he said. It is. He paused. You told me you needed to think about the operational status. I did think about it, she said. And Emily was quiet for a moment. The corridor moved around them. Bagram moved around them. The whole complicated, imperfect machinery of the world they operated in moved around them, and in the middle of it, a 15-year-old girl who had saved 14 lives in less than 24 hours stood with her rifle case on her back and her father's cracked mirror in her kit and made the decision she had already known she was going to make since the moment Calloway had walked out of that meeting room. Yes, she said. Full operational status. I accept. Calloway nodded once. Effective immediately, he said. He looked at her for a long moment. Your father asked me to look after you, then he said. I want you to know that this, he gestured vaguely at everything, is my version of that, imperfect. Probably wrong in ways I can't see yet, but honest. I know, she said, and she meant it. Thank you, Director. He nodded again. Walked away, doing what he had to do next, which was the way of everyone in this world, always what came next, 6:41 p.m. The team was in the common area when Emily came in. Not a formal gathering, and nothing about it was formal. Webb was there on crutches, which he was using with the specific resentment of a man who considered crutches a personal insult. Torres and Cruz were at the table. Garza was against the far wall with his arms crossed, but his arms crossed differently now than they had this time yesterday. Reyes was in a chair with his ankle wrapped, having been caught by the medical team exactly as Emily had predicted. Mitchell was there too, which was the thing that made Hawk understand this was not accidental. They had gathered, the way teams gathered without announcement or agenda when something had happened that required the gathering. Emily stopped in the doorway. Webb looked at her. You went out again, he said, after last night. Yes, she said. Greenberg told us about Sentinel-3. He shifted on the crutches. You okay? I'm fine, she said. That's not what I asked, he said, using Calloway's words without knowing it. She looked at him, and there it was again, that almost smile, small and dry and completely real. I'm tired, she said. Yeah, Webb said. You're allowed to be. She came into the room, sat down at the table. Reyes pushed a mug toward her coffee, probably still hot without making it a gesture. Just put it in front of her and looked back at his phone. The kind of gesture that said you belong here more clearly than any speech could. She wrapped her hands around it. Mitchell looked at her from across the table. Full operational status, he said, not a question. Yes, she said. He nodded, looked at the team. Let the silence do the work. And then Garza from against the wall unfolded his arms and pulled out a chair and sat down at the table. Just that, sat down, in the space that had been held for him without anyone saying so. Sierra 7, Garza said. Emily looked at him. Welcome to the team, he said. The room was quiet. Then Torres said, officially, and Cruz said, about time. And Reyes didn't look up from his phone, but the edge of something was happening at the corner of his mouth, and Webb shifted his weight on the crutches and said, can someone get her better coffee? That stuff Reyes gave her has been sitting there since this morning. The room moved. The way rooms moved when the weight had been named and accounted for, and people were ready to be human again around it. Mitchell leaned back. Torres got up for the coffee. Garza said something to Cruz about the ankle, and Reyes responded without looking up, which meant they had already had this conversation and would have it again tomorrow. Hawk watched it from the doorway. Watched Emily Carter sit at that table with her hands around a mug and her rifle case propped against her chair in a room that had laughed at her 20 hours ago and was now quietly and without ceremony doing the one thing that mattered more than any report or any commendation or any official designation. Treating her like she was exactly where she belonged, 7:52 p.m. Hawk found her later on the same concrete step, same wall. The mug had been replaced with a better one, which he supposed was Torres's doing. The corridor was quieter at this hour, Most of the day shift had turned over. He sat down. She didn't open her eyes. "You don't have to keep checking on me," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm not checking. I just came to sit." A pause. Then she shifted slightly, the smallest accommodation. Making room. They sat. "What did your father tell you," Hawk said, "about what comes after the mission, after the decision, after all of it?" She thought about it, really thought. "He said the hardest part wasn't the field," she said. "It was being a person when you came back from the field, remembering what the other things were, the things that weren't the mission." A pause. "He said you had to be very deliberate about it, because the mission had a shape. It had a beginning and a middle and an end, and it told you exactly what to do at every point. Being a person was harder. It was open-ended. You had to decide what it meant without a target and without a range and without a scope." "What did he decide it meant?" Hawk asked. "Me," she said, simply. "He decided it meant me. Calling in before the debrief, teaching me with the mirror, eating dinner and asking about my day like his day had been ordinary." She paused. "He found the ordinary things and he held on to them as hard as he held on to everything else." A pause. "I'm still learning how to do that." "You have time," Hawk said. She opened her eyes, looked at him. "Do I?" "You have tonight," he said. "That's enough to start with." She looked at the mug. "He used to say that the most important shot was the next one, not the last one. The last one is already done. The next one is where you still have choices." "He was right," Hawk said. "He usually was," she said. They sat in the corridor for a while longer. The bass settled into its nighttime tempo around them. Somewhere in the medical wing, Webb was probably complaining about the crutches. Somewhere in the operations center, Mitchell was writing another report in the careful way he wrote things that were going to matter. Somewhere in a secure location, Calloway was making calls that would shape what happened next. And on a concrete step in a corridor at Bagram, a 15-year-old girl who had made 12 confirmed eliminations and saved 14 lives in less than 24 hours sat with her hands around a mug and her father's cracked mirror in her kit and the full weight of a life that had given her no clean choices and every capability she needed to live it. She was not a legend yet. Legends required distance. They required time and retelling and the softening that came when the sharp edges of the real thing were worn smooth by repetition. Right now, she was just Emily, Carter Sierra 7, sitting on a step being tired in the only way she knew how, to be tired quietly, deliberately, with full awareness of what she was carrying and full intention of carrying it again tomorrow. But in the years that followed and the missions filed under classifications so deep, they required their own clearance levels in the field reports written by commanders who ran out of superlatives and started writing simply and specifically about what they had seen in the quiet reputation that spread through the parts of the intelligence community that dealt in exactly this kind of work. She became something else. Not because she sought it, not because she performed it, but because the standard she set on a freezing mountain in Kunar province at 15 years old in a blizzard with a cracked mirror and her father's voice in her memory, and 11 men depending on what she could do, that standard held. Mission after mission, year after year, distance after impossible distance. The youngest operator in the history of the Special Activities Division, the only asset ever designated Sierra 7 for 2 consecutive decades. The woman who trained the next generation of long-range operators using a teaching methodology that began with a cracked mirror and a question, "What do you see behind the thing you're looking at?" And always at the bottom of the training document in the margin where her father had once written his own notes, a single line in her handwriting. Not a motto, not a slogan, just the truth as she had lived it, which was the only kind of truth that mattered. Skill is not measured by age. It is measured by consequence. And the consequence was written in every mission completed. Every life brought home, every operator she trained who went out into the hard places of the world and came back because she had taught them what her father had taught her, that precision was discipline. Under pressure, that the mirror showed you what the rifle couldn't reach, and that the most dangerous person in any room was not the loudest or the oldest or the most decorated. It was the one who had already done the calculation. Sierra 7, call sign confirmed, legend earned, not in the laughter of a briefing room, in the silence that came after.